Et donc, je vais donner ma présentation.
So I'm going to give my presentation in French. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Hammamet and to Tunisia. For this AFRINIC conference, I represent the Tunisia regulator, the IoT, with my colleague Baklouti. We're going to introduce, in this context, a brief overview about the challenges that we have to deal with Internet of Things, and especially in terms of Internet. So we're going to give our experience in Tunisia, to display the Tunisian case, and to introduce the concept of governance, and the impact that could be generated by the IoT to be operating, and in order to make of this topic an important subject of the regulator. So the plan we intend to follow is the following. First, we'll give a brief overview about Internet governance, and then we'll introduce the Internet of Objects with facts and figures, and then we'll move to more details about the impact of these objects on the governance, Internet governance process, and especially in terms of stakes, in terms of regulation of the telecommunication sector, and then we'll end up with the Tunisian case in order to introduce the Tunisian experience in this field. So I give the floor to my colleague Baklouti to start this presentation. Thank you, Mr. Weshdi. Good morning, everybody. As raised by Mr. Weshdi, the presentation will be subdivided in 4 parts. The first one will contain a brief overview focused on the Internet governance, because it's a topic that will help us to get into more details from what I understood as to the following presentations. Let's start first by the definition of Internet governance as given by the task force working on the Internet governance during the WISIS 2005 in Tunisia. The Internet governance consists in drafting the application through the states, the private sector, and the civil society in line with their respective roles. These principles, standards, and procedures, and also the decisions and the programs closely related to the drafting and the use of Internet. It's a definition that is highly complex already, and in addition to that, it brings into play several actors in addition to the state, the private sector, and the civil society. We find several other actors. First, we can talk about the standardization organizations who are entrusted with the specification of the identifiers, the names of the domains and the IP addresses and the different components of the network. In addition to that, they are supposed to define all the roles and to define all of the rules that are related to the uses of these identifiers, as well as the technical specificities related to the interface of all of the network components. Secondly, we find the regulation authorities, such as the governments and the regulators themselves, who are asked to ascribe all these identifiers as defined by the standardization authorities, and to identify the overall rules identified by these regulators for the management of conflicts, etc. Third, we find the operators and the FAI, who will be using these identifiers to lay out the different piece of equipment used by the Internet operators. They are equally asked to act in conformity with the different standards that are defined by the standardization authorities. Fourth, we find the suppliers of equipment, whose role is to produce, design, and develop the different pieces of equipment and who are equally required to act in conformity with the standards as defined by the standardization authorities. And in conclusion, you find the regulators who are going to use the overall identifiers and hardware programs connect to internet and to respect the technical specificities and the principles related to the use of these hardware pieces. Also, they are interested in improving this kind of use. Among the international organizations that are involved in the internet governance, we have three. First, we have LICAN, which is the authority in charge of the management technical resources, the names of the fields and the addresses, the IGF, which is the main body in charge of the internet governance and which is dealing with the various topics of the internet like cybersecurity and the reduction of the digital divide between the North and the South, and the ISOC, the Internet Society, who is in charge of drawing up the internet standards and to discuss the different ideas existing between the different internet users. Now Mr. Wajdi will give us a few facts and figures about the Internet of Objects, and after that we will analyze the impact of the object Internet on the governance processes. Thank you. So once we have provided the Internet governance, let us now analyze some figures about the objects Internet. We start with the definition. So I took this definition from the study group 20 of the GO. We are here talking about a standard definition. It's the infrastructure, the global infrastructure, which gathers the information society, and that is conducive to disseminating some services by interconnecting the different objects. Now, thanks to the IT services, in this definition, we try to remind that there are many stakeholders involved in terms of usage for the objects Internet. So we can analyze the objects Internet in some telephone applications in the farming sector and in the transportation sector and in the urban management programs. So the major stakeholders existing on the value chain of the IoT are quite commonplace in terms of the terminal devices that we are going to communicate with the router path that should be compatible in terms of this IoT technology. We have to provide for the level of connection, so there are some frequency bands that we can use at the level of the IoT, and if we are going to host a smart service, we need a platform that will manage this service, and behind this platform we can host our application, which will be screening the different services so that we can get to the value chain. Now, each segment of this value chain is run by a specific manager, for instance, the constructors, for those who are constructing the captors or the sensors, and the operators to ensure the itinerary and the connections, and we have the developers and the suppliers of the platform of the content. In this complex scenario, in terms of stakeholders, we can notice some stakes that will lead us to raise some questions. Do we have to regulate or not to regulate? How to behave before such a complex technology and before such a new system in the fields of governance? So in this context, we can say that some objects can be underscored by the ITU in order to improve the efficiency and the duration and the costs. So we are under the cost constraint and the efficiency of these different objects being processed. Also, we have to determine the level of service provided, and we have to reinforce as well the customer service. This is why there is a need to be provided. So we have to provide some new models of governance or maybe we have to come out with a new regulation process. So we have two parties. We have to regulate because we are using some scarce resources, and we have to regulate because there's a question of costs that should be taken into account. But in order to govern, we have to ask the appropriate questions about the regulation. In order to have reasonable costs, will it be a reason to block this technology, or if we are too ambitious in terms of frequency, we cannot disseminate these internet services all over. So I think that we have a good and smart governance to meet the challenge of the ITU. I'm talking in a country like Tunisia, where we are going to analyze the Tunisian case, and we have to focus on the ITU. Why? Because we are witnessing a lot of evolution in terms of ICT, because this is necessary in terms of applications and contact, and we do feel this need for good data system and a good governance, and this triggers an implementation of the master links for our regulating the process while respecting the good governance of the internet system. In terms of internet governance, let me give you a few figures about the progress of the ITU, and everybody knows that there has been a real boom in terms of devices. We can go as far the forecast, we can go from 50 to 80 billion objects by the event of 2020. So if we calculate for each user, we can use up to 6 devices that could be identified as objects connected to the internet. So a turnover that could be triggered, and that may reach $1,300 billion about these connections. And the source is the IoT, which is conducted by the consultant. So about these figures, I'm going to focus on the graph to the right, on the graphic to the right, which illustrates the evolution and the forecasts related to the expenditure made at the level of the IoT, and especially in terms of security. Among the challenges that IoT has to meet due to this new technology, all the infrastructure and all the constructions are interested in reinforcing the security aspect, and you can see that the cost could double up from 2019, 2010. The figures could be huge. I'm not going to delve into the details here, but just to analyze these figures, I think they represent general interest, especially in terms of security. So the security is a question that is negotiated within the topic of the internet governance, and this is why the IoT is a revolutionary technology. This is quite obvious, but why is this true? Why? Because the IoT has a device that could give private services, so we can identify its profiling. If you have a thermometer, you would like it to find out the temperature in any room. If you have a video camera, you would like to focus on the people or on the objects where they exist already. So you can really identify all the confidential data or the private data of people. So now here we are trying to personify this data because we need this kind of process. Also, we can for the customers, we can introduce some interface cases. So now we need to press a button or to activate a process, and the whole thing is triggered. So this is the smartness of the final user, and here we run a real risk. We cannot give more trust to objects, but we have to trust the final users in order to keep these private data under control, and we agree whether to share them or not. We have to know everything in real time also. I'm not going to make an analogy here about the situation as it prevails for the moment for the Google or for Facebook, because they know everything about us virtually, and of course the IoT knows everything about us. If we know the profiling, and in real time the data that could be carried or conveyed, we can know everything, not about the human being, but about a country or any given environment. So this challenge should be fairly established. Why? Because do we have to resort to self-regulation? This is what we call at the level of the regulation authorities, to give full freedom to the actors or to make a tough regulation. So we have to make up our mind where to be located. And in order to respond to this kind of balances and this equilibrium, we have to ask an appropriate question. We have to undertake a good governance, because the government is going to react. So we are talking about one authority. I talk about the government. If we can talk, can we entrust this to only one entity? For instance, the constructors. This is a problem for the IoT, because well, the setbacks and the technologies are enhanced by the constructors, and it's up to the ICT operators to define the concept. Is it to be entrusted to the private sector, to the government, or to the CSOs? Because as end users we are going to use these data, and we have to define what should be made in terms of governance. Or do we have to deal with a multi-stakeholder approach? So we have to resort to everything to determine what should be regulated and what should be revised at the level of the IoT. This question leads us to the question, who governs indeed? In now, the multi-stakeholder model or the multi-actor model, we are going to revisit this, and I think that this is a collaborative approach rather than a multi-stakeholder approach. But who governs here? We have to hold a round table about the stakeholders of the internet, be it in the industrial sector, because these are the actors who are asking for the breakthrough in the ICTs, and the authorities who are controlling the frequency bands and the sources, and also they are in charge of the protection of the national security. Also the CSOs, because there is an impending need and the service is geared towards the end users, so they consider the real stakeholders, and we have the standardization authorities who are entrusted with all technical issues. So who governs here in this field? We have to get the answer to this question, and by analyzing what kind of impact on the governance process to get to the appropriate answer. So I give the floor back to my colleague. Thank you. So as raised by Mr. Wajdi, to respond to the different questions that are raised, we are going to analyze the impact of the IoT about the governance process. First, the IoT helps us to promote the expansion of the infrastructure items related to the internet and to the use of data. The infrastructure available is more and more out of date, so we have to adjust it and to upgrade it in order to meet the new ideas of the technology. So we have to revisit our infrastructure first. Second, the use of IoT is not limited to the urban environment, but there are some IoTs in the rural areas as well, and therefore we need to expand the infrastructure required in the rural areas, and therefore we will upgrade the use of these infrastructures. On the other hand, the IOC use a lot of frequencies, so we are going to be with an increasing number of wide band, and for the whole data collected by the IoT, what we call the big data, we need a data center and a processing platform. So we are going to ask for the development of this data center and the collector and data analysis platforms. This is the first topic of the IoT on governance. The second chapter, when we talk about connected objects, we talk about identifiers and email address, but we know already that there is a shortage of the IPv4. So for the last years we moved on to the IPv6. With the emergence of the IoT, we are going to need more and more IPv6, and therefore this should be considered as a national priority. to move to IPv6. So the IoT is located within a very quick and rapid environment, which is requested by many industries, and therefore the cases of use are much more numerous, and therefore we have to fall back on a participatory approach. Why? Because we need the governments, the international authorities, and the manufacturers, and the CSOs. First, we need to upgrade the capacity of the users to be connected to internet. This could be the responsibility of the CSOs and the manufacturers and also the government. We need to upgrade the innovation in terms of the IT. This is the task of the research labs and the manufacturers and the standardization authorities. Also, we have to respect the rights of these users. Here comes into play the role of the CSOs. Why do we talk often about the rules of the rights of the users? Because we need a collaborative approach in terms of security. We need to share the best experiences in terms of security. We need also to draw up a new system of security, which is the task of the manufacturers, and we have to draw awareness of the users about the dangers that could derive from the use of IoT. So we associate the Internet of Things to the Internet of Threats, because the confidentiality and the security are very important issues for the IoT. Why? Because this IoT system presents the risk of more vulnerability for the theft of the user's data, and this data could be highly sensitive and they are closely related to the private life of the citizens and the industrial secrets of the manufacturers and the different corporations. Everybody is monitoring and being monitored by the surveillance cameras whenever they are connected. Why? This is due to a lack of awareness and to a lack of consent from the users. For instance, the gentleman who's got a stopwatch which regulates its heart throbs and it sends its data to his doctor, but he doesn't know that these data are going to be sent to the manufacturer for various reasons. So here we need to popularize the need to protect the personal data. In Europe, for the last 10 years, we have been talking about the chip silence, and because they exist everywhere and they give very good data about transportation, about security, but at the same time, we are talking about ubiquitous centers which are used by everybody and which are being introduced little by little in the private life of the citizens. This whole system will affect the fundamental liberties of the citizens. That's why we started to think about the need to come out with some silence about these chips. Therefore, we have to provide the data that are extended, and we have to be able to protect this data, and we have to be able to deactivate these chips at any given time. The application of these silent chips from the legal point of view is manifested through the law about the need to protect personal data and the right to being informed. So the chips must be conspicuous and we have to be aware of their existence and about the security of the data that are being exchanged. In 2016 in Europe also we have voted the general rule about the protection of data, which came into force in 2018 and which demands, amongst others, the explicit and positive consent of the users. In other words, the citizens should have more control on their private data, the right to any access. The users can ask the deletion to delete their data at any given time. The principles of the protection of data as early as the production of this system, and we have to protect, of course, the information lying behind this data. And we have, in case of leakage, we have to be able to take the necessary measures to avoid this threat. This is in Europe. Now let us see with Mr. Wejdi how does the situation lend itself to Tunisia, and they are going to focus on the Tunisian case. Thank you. So we come back to the question of the achievement of Tunisia in terms of internet governance, and notably about in relation to the IoT. So in Tunisia, now I'm giving some data that have been collected among the three operators of the markets. Of course, we have a fourth operator of infrastructure. We have an MVNO. In other words, we have a virtual network. And we are talking about some suppliers who detect these data. So we have 5 FIA. So since 2017, the Tunisian government has launched some call for tenders to ascribe the IoT franchises. In 2017, we have offered 17 franchises, and the subscription to this call for tender has been quite numerous, and the Tunisian has offered another call for tenders, which ended up with 9 licenses being attributed in 2017, and there is no obstacle to the end user number of this license. Costs 10,000 dinars, so everybody could participate, including the startups. This is in a bid for the government to encourage the progress of the IoT in the country. This is an innovative idea for the new startups. With regards to these franchises, the frequencies, the broadband that we have used, it's the broadband weight 863 until 870 megahertz. With regards to the number and the figures achieved in Tunisia, now the progress of the automatic subscriptions has reached 110,000 devices. They are chips that are applied to devices. You know that the number has been increasing continuously. Now let me here talk about the opportunities that are provided thanks to this legislative framework, the IoT. It has provided many opportunities to be provided with some rights and with some duties. The tapping of the IoT, among which there's the ongoing services, the security in terms of communication and the confidentiality of communication, and also we have issued the law to protect the private data. We have this license have also referred to the service neutrality, regardless of what we can convey on the network. Now the operators cannot operate on the data. They can ensure their conveyance regardless of the bits without touching their neutrality. Also, we have focused on the implementation of the service quality tools to ensure the level of services that is provided for the more expansive telecom network, and the need to host in case the customer requires this on the Tunisian territory. So there is no duty, but there is an option for the final user to host his data in Tunisia. For instance, if the government uses the IoT, they can demand to keep their data on the Tunisian territory. In terms of tapping this data, and especially from the commercial point of view, the Tunisian legislator did not really demand an increase in control on the commercial segment, so we can have some free trade and marketing operations, and later on the operators and the suppliers can provide the services, and therefore we can be confronted with a problem of competition at the level of the prices. And then when it comes to regulation, the INT intervenes to regulate the question of competition. And now, of course, we have to treat the customers with full fairness and transparency. The Tunisian legislation has defined some aspects with a good regulation and with a good governance. For the work that are busy doing for the moment, if we're going to look for a general consensus, we have to seek the advice of all the stakeholders. So we have launched at the level of the INT a public consultation to provide the broad lines of the typical subjects in terms of tapping the IoT. Now, just to give you why do we need this public consultation, we haven't a regulatory framework about the tapping of the IoT network. We have this for the 3G or the 4G. It's different. So why do we need a legal framework? In Tunisia we have 29 franchises, and in 27 we have 9 other franchises. In 2018 we're going to have some more, but tangibly speaking we didn't see any business offers that are provided to the IoT. They are really rare, and maybe there is more to do in terms of commercial efforts, and this is why we intended to sit around the same table for this public consultation, and we have to find out whether we have to protect the small enterprises, or do we have to go ahead in order to protect the final user. And among the items on the agenda of this consultation that is to be launched shortly, we have the ecosystem of the IoT. We have many stakeholders. We talk about the economic model. Is it reliable? Is it reliable also for the small enterprises and for the end user, because the end service shall not be quite high. The connectivity technologies, is it now these broadbands, are they enough when they are mounted on chips, or do we have to connect them to other networks and other technologies? Because as the name indicates, here we are talking about the processing of things, so we are not talking about broadbands, and therefore the technology should be neutral and transparent at the same time. We have the sharing of infrastructure. Maybe the enterprises cannot really share these infrastructure devices because they can't afford it, or because this infrastructure is very costly to buy some infrastructure among any operators. This probably would cause many economic problems. And thus the possibility to share the infrastructure devices and the shared network. Also we have the national roaming. Is it at the Tunisian or at the international level? So for instance, the smartwatch, is it really feasible to run any project for my company and which use the data that are mounted on the smartwatch, and especially outside our borders? Can we continue the services or not? So we have the question of the roaming at the international level and the entailed costs. The last point about the public consultation are the marketing approaches to be implemented. Do we have to act the laissez-faire policy and allow the operators to define their approaches quite clearly as spelled out in the license, but do we have to fall back on a large monopoly where all the large enterprises can have high prices that the end users have to respect? This is what we call the monopoly, economic monopoly, and that requires a lot of extra efforts. The works underway, as we say, the launching of the public consultation, which will be useful to draw up the legal framework for the deployment and the tapping of the IoT solutions. So the licenses have been distributed, but we have to provide a legal framework for the tapping of these data. Therefore, about this legal framework, we are going to ask what kind of framework about the private addresses would be used, because the devices are identified by their serial numbers. This is a question to be raised as well. What are the, in terms of the value chain, what are the IoT that we have to secure? Now, what kind of security in terms of compliance and the need to protect the private data? And what are the measures to be adopted by the stakeholders? But how can we provide more security without affecting the private liberty of the end users, and also in conformity with the legislation underway? Now, currently, there is another approach which is underway in terms of security. So now we are here trying to put a central system for the identification of the mobile terminals. In Tunisia, there are many devices that are equipped on the smartphones and that are illegal. This, of course, applies on the informal market. So what are the solutions to be brought in order to avoid this kind of loss? And, of course, how to avoid any danger in terms of cyber attack. This is why Tunisia is busy setting up a centralized system to help detect all these informal or illegal terminals on the basis of their RMI or their serial numbers. So here, to this basis, we are going to add the devices on this platform for the to facilitate the marketing of some IoT services. We're going to add the number of the smartphones and the objects that have been marketed in order to avoid at the national level the follow-up. So there is an attack on the IoT. We can identify immediately the device that lies behind this attack and to avoid any threats. And this, especially if this use is highly extended by unknown devices. This is the presentation about Tunisia, and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, of course, you're welcome.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your patience and your attention.
Some question, but we are going to keep at most 3. And after the question, we'll go for the break. So thank you very much for the queue. You can start now. You give your name. Where are you from? If you want to give your age, no problem for that.
Jordi Palet from Spain. I am too old to say my age. I just want to clarify something. In one of your slides, you mentioned that the responsible for standards, I think it was slide number 2, is ISOC.
It was very mistake, typing mistakes.
Well, you have the ISOC logo, so it's not just a typing mistake.
No, I'm as well as an ISOC member.
Okay.
So
the thing is, just to clarify to the people here, and I hope you correct the slides before submitting them to the website, because this is really a big mistake. ITF is an independent organization. It's true that during some years it was under the administrative umbrella of ISOC, but ISOC don't control the standards at all. So, and ITF, since several months ago, now it's even an independent administrative organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is and I want to thank you for your presentation. Well, during your presentation, you were talking about regulation. One of the things I see about regulation is an impediment to development. I don't know what level of regulation. Yes, regulation is necessary, but if you have too much regulation, then what you're probably is we are impeding development. and especially when it comes to the structure of the internet, because we started with the internet governance, which is a good one. But by the time you start talking about regulation, I think regulation, especially for the internet, it's one thing that would probably lead to a lot of problems. Thank you.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Sophie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm a student at the Computer Science College in Algeria. My question is more technical, and I need more details about the protection of the end users. What is the device that you use to protect the end users against any attack or the use of the illegal use of the manufacturers, still in line with the neutrality of the services being provided? Good morning, everybody. My name is Sheikh Mabrouk. I'm from Mauritania, and I am a computer engineer in Nouakchott. My question about the multi-stakeholder governance. What I noticed in the Tunisian case is that there is a consensus here to define an internet policy regulation, or is it used to define the process simply? I will respect the order of the questions being raised. So with regards to more details about the role of the ISAC, yes, it's true, we don't define the standards and the requirements. It's a spelling mistake, and I do second what you said, and we will correct this mistake before we submit the presentation for the AFRINIC website. With regards to the second question, are we quite often we say that too many regulations is stifling, and through my slides, this is what I wanted to demonstrate. And I wanted to say this indirectly. Our major concern at the INT is not to impose any kind of regulation, but we intend rather to use the regulations or the rules or decisions related to this regulation in an open way to deal with or to use a multi-stakeholder approach. If we have any focal point concerning any excess of regulation, now, because through my slides I wanted to underscore the following. The process that is being used by the INT in Tunisia is to have a regulation, an open regulation process. We have already launched this public consultation for more ideas and for more proposals and to include more actors in the decision taking. And I fully agree with those who said that too many regulations is stifling, especially if we come back to the IoT licenses. We have tried to make sure that the costs are free and not regulated, and technology could be free, but there are some regulations concerning data protection, concerning the need to ensure some service quality, the ongoing or the sustainability of these services. So in reality in Tunisia, maybe we come under the feeling that the regulators are doing everything, but I'm here to decry this, and I'd like in Tunisia to make sure that we use a collaborative approach, and I just try to explain it. We have many efforts reflecting our own approach, and I do fully subscribe to your idea. If we leave it to one stakeholder or operator only take a decision for the government, of course will now, I think that in Tunisia we have already gone beyond these threats, and I think that we can be more optimistic about the future. With concerning the third question, I wanted really to clarify that from the technical point of view and in terms of the security of the different devices, if I can come back to the last slide about this project, for instance, which is geared towards the protection of these various devices. What we are doing actually is at the level of the central platform, we have the GSNA. They could also be, we can add here the IoT and the other bodies of the IoT which are going to supply the device or the manufacturers of these authentic devices which are going to supply this database, and at the level of this basis the authorities here come into play to undertake some consultation, and the operators, if they detected that there is an IoT device at the level of the network which is not registered in this database here, we are going to notify the regulator of this abuse, and in this case we can even intervene on the origin of these attacks. If there's an attack that has been registered, we can probably deactivate it. And you notice here that we are talking about a multi-stakeholder aspect. It's not only the government which is acting here, but we have many stakeholders, so the end user could notify the operators of this danger, or if there's any illegal operators, if there are any bypasses or any fraudulent actions at the level of the system. For the last question, I think that it's more a command than a question. Look, I'm not going to react to this. And just for Tunisia, the question of IoT is a recent topic, and we have attributed the licenses, and we wanted to accompany the actors in this ecosystem, because when we are too many operators and we start the governance process, and if there are many different stakeholders, we can have stakeholders who are probably stronger than others. So what we propose is to assist the startups. For instance, the ministry did provide a lot of incentives for the startups, including the possibility to use the IoT. But the Tunisian approach consists in working within a friendly ecosystem and an expansive environment that can benefit everybody in a small and in a smooth way through the IoT process. Thank you for your attention.